service you're looking for. Pick it up, the Shepherd's Guide. Look us up in the Shepherd's Guide. Call us up, see why we say it's the Christian's choice of Yellow Pages.
To advertise or receive your free copy, call 716-688-3882.
Serving Lockport and Dunkirk. We're Power 96.5 FM, 1080 AM, WUFO, Amherst, Buffalo.
For the next hour, you will be listening to Living Now with L. Nathan Hare. The phone lines are now open at 837-1112, and we encourage your questions and comments. Now, without further ado, here's your host, L. Nathan Hare.
Living right now. This is L. Nathan here, your host here for this next hour at WFO Power 96.5 FM on your dial. Our principal sponsor, of course, is the Community Action Organization of Western New York, still fighting the war on poverty, now in our 53rd year. I want to welcome all of you again to this hour of insight, introspection, and interpretation of facts, events, and trends affecting you right here and right now in Buffalo and Western New York, and in fact, connecting to communities all across the country. Each week, we focus on things we think will be of interest to you, which will serve to motivate you and serve to connect you to the broader issues that affect our communities here in Western New York. Now, today's program is live, so you can call and you can join our discussion. I hope that you will. Our number here again is 837-1112. That's 837-1112. I'm also here with Emmanuel Radford, who does the live streaming of the program. So if you're at home on your computer, if you got a handheld device that allows you to get onto the internet, you type in Facebook and then type in Living Now. The program will come up. You can see us talking on the air. But more importantly, you can type in your questions, your concerns, or your observations, and we'll respond to them on the air, as many as we can. I want to talk more about this discussion we've been having for the last couple of weeks about where I think we have to be going in the long-term reformation of our public schools. Notice I didn't talk about reform. Reform just means change. You can turn something into something ugly, and that's reform. You can turn something into something good, and that's reform. So I don't like to use that word reform because it's too neutral. It just means change. I'm talking about reforming, forming all over again, reconstructing our public school systems so that they work in the way that they were intended to work, as becoming an agent of socialization and of pulling every new generation into the economy and into the citizenship of the United States in a way that is relatively uniform for everybody in terms of their access to and benefit from that education process. For most, the most common experience shared by virtually all Americans is most likely school. Unless you grew up living in a box, more than likely all of us have been to school. I know there's probably some that decided to leave at the kindergarten, but most of us went to school the whole way. School is the glue that holds us together when so many other things like race and sex and culture and class and so on tend to pull people apart. The history of schooling in this country reflects this very notion of school as the glue that holds the society together. I don't know if, for those of you that are historically oriented, if you remember a guy named Horace Mann in the middle of the 19th century, in the 1840s, 1850s. He was one of the principal architects of the public school system in the United States. And he made a statement in his opening remarks at the 12th annual report for the country on schools in 1848. He said, I perceive that in trying to show how the true business of the schoolroom connects itself and becomes identical with the great interest of our society. In speaking about the function of the school in our nation's early years, Carl Castle said that the school was emerging as the principal instrument of cognitive and moral teaching and as an important instrument of public policy. So cognitive teaching is teaching us the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. Add science in there. I know it doesn't have an R, but add science in there as well. But in addition to that, schools also were supposed to be the central foundation of how we taught the basic moral premises of society. And what do we mean by the basic moral premises of society? Well, society doesn't work if I leave my house and I come home and I find, my door laying on the steps and my TV's gone and my calculator's gone, my sofa's gone. Society doesn't work if we're robbing each other, right? So we have to teach each other not to do that. That's not in our best interest as a community of people in our society. When you're around children, you're not trying to steal from children. You're not trying to harm children. You're not trying to sexually exploit children. When you're in a position of interaction, between other people, you don't make people's lives uncomfortable by, swearing out loud, running around, dropping stuff, bumping into people, that sort of stuff, right? It's school that's supposed to socialize you into a value framework independent of your religion, into a value framework that creates a set of shared expectations among all of us about what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, so that we can count on each other to behave within certain bounds. Well, if you didn't have schools to do that, how would it get done across the society? Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. There's a fellow named Frederick Law Olmsted. Most of you who lived in Buffalo know him, the greatest landscape architect I think that this country's ever had. And in order to get himself financed to go into the landscape architect business, he became a reporter, a journalist. And he would go around the country and he would write stories about what he saw, and he'd send these stories back to the New York Daily Post, whatever they called themselves at the time. And they would pay him, and that's how he began to organize his resources. He went out to Missouri. Missouri this is in 1850 or so. Missouri at the time was not a state. It was a territory. See, everybody always laughs when I say that, because they think territory, what does that mean? Like the Wild Wild West? Well, yeah, that's what Missouri was. Missouri was the Wild Wild West. It was a territory, not a state. And because it was a territory and not a state, they didn't have in 1850 the same kinds of social constructs that they had in, say, Massachusetts, or that they had in New York State and so on. They didn't have a road system. They didn't have a school system. They didn't have, public library systems and things like that. It was a territory. It was the Wild Wild West. And so the people who lived out there basically lived on their own devices. This will tell you a little bit about what schooling is about. Because when Frederick Law Olmsted studied what was going on in Missouri, he studied mortality. And mortality is death rates. And what he found was that the number one cause of death for any person at any age level, whether you were 1 day old or 114 days old, the number one cause of death at any age in the territory of Missouri was murder. Yeah, wrap your mind around that. Okay, this civilized society, they try to make you think and there weren't that many African people in Missouri. So this was not Chicago. Okay, that's not what was going on. This was the so-called frontiersmen of America acting like themselves. And without the constraint of government and institutions that bound everybody together, people were left on their own. And left on their own, they behaved in a way where the number one threat to the life of any person in the territory of Missouri was murder. I say that to say that when you leave people, or at least those people, if you leave them on their own, up to their own devices with no constraints, they act like themselves. And when they act like themselves, this is what that means. The number one cause of death in your society is going to be murder, right? And of course, other things like rape and stealing and, land robbing and cattle rustling and all that stuff was a part of this show. The connection is not merely the inclusion or exclusion of the cultural context of the populations of students being educated. It is the reality that schools are the primary artifact of a community that binds the vast majority of the community's people together. That's what schools do. So they not only ensure or hope to ensure that there is a baseline level of academic literacy in your society so that we can count on us all being able to speak a certain level of quality of depth of English, that we can count on each other to know a little bit of math reasoning, that we can count on each other to have a basic understanding of, how crops grow and, how concrete settles, that sort of, just the basics, right? But that doesn't happen by osmosis, right? Somebody has to teach you. And so schools are a source of pride by which the members of the community served by a school feel a sense of shared ownership of the achievements of the school and its students. For those of you who are a bit older, you remember that you felt a certain pride about your school when they were neighborhood schools. That was my school, School 53. My grandmother went there, my father went there, my aunt went there, my older brother went there, my older sister went there. We did this, we did that. We had success, in our little campus sports leagues and our debate clubs. And, we took pride, even if we weren't the debate team member. You took pride in the fact that your school's debate team did well. We're at elementary school, but you took pride that when you played Calisanctius at their elementary school, although none of y'all could play, but you took pride in the fact that you beat them, and so on, right? And it wasn't like you went to go destroy their school. You just took pride in the fact that your school had pulled together the gumption, to be able to put something together that represented your school, represented your community, represented your neighborhood. There's it allows the growth. The schools allow for the growth of the growth of a sustainable or sustaining of group buy-in to the school's academic, sports, and social goals. David Tyack, in his book Public Schools in Hard Times, states that public schools have long been part of an energizing dream of social justice, but hard times and a conservative political environment threaten to dim that vision. Now, that's something that we have to Nyack was talking about this 25, 30 years ago. What he was saying is what we see going on right now. When we go through hard times, then the people that have control of the resources of the country, the people that are the fat cats who tend to survive, whether there's a recession or a depression or there's, a great economic renaissance, there's a certain set of people that are above the fray. Their money survives everything, right? And that class of people, they tend to pull their support for public education backward. They reduce their support for public education during times of economic stress because it means that there's some stress on their resources as well. So, you're real good with donating money when you got a whole lot of money, but when your money is not coming in as rapidly as it used to come in, you tend not to be, a vibrant person of the donor class and so on. And so what he talked about was that schools make possible the emergence of a commonly shared basic literacy in math, English, and science reasoning. They also make possible a shared sense of growth in academic competence and in the ability of students and their community members to see and internalize a shared sense of everyone pursuing a similar path from family formation, shepherding children to adulthood. Schools breed a sense of community, of common culture, a commonly held vision of how each community member achieves economic stability, and a commonly held belief in the community's capabilities and shared values, each of which are reinforced by the school and the community's members. Schools are the primary vehicle that ensures that new members of the community become connected to the shared fabric of the community's sense of itself. Now, I'm speaking about this because I want you to understand, if you take something that is created for a particular purpose and you reorganize that thing and use it for a different purpose, you can't count on it to still be able to produce the original goal that you had created for that thing. So schools in neighborhoods used to be a unifying force within a neighborhood. Even if you didn't go to the school, even if you were an adult who didn't have any kids go to the school, you still had a certain sense of shared ownership and shared pride in the achievement of the children in that school. Our school's a great school down the street. You know, they do a great job. They won the debate thing. Their basketball team won, the basketball tournament. Their baseball team does great. They did the science project that was in a newspaper, blah, blah, blah. Those things sort of create a sense of achievement that is shared by everybody within the community served by that school. In addition to that, if those schools become the vehicle through which adults in the community can access educational resources and people, not just physical resources, but also teachers who are willing to work after school and out of school with adults in the community, teaching them things about parenthood, about nutrition, about how you prepare meals with a certain level of budget, doing volunteer voter preparation, organizing block clubs, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, rites of passage programs, things like that. When schools work in that way in a community, they become the most significant vital force that unites people in the community, where they all feel a shared sense of oneness, regardless of who makes up the community. So, I live in the Perry Projects, right? We had a period of time when the Danny Projects, were closed, and all of a sudden we had a very significant number of Hispanic people that became residents of the Commodore Perry Projects. Well, it didn't take long for everybody to become a part of the same set. You had the Polish people that lived on the other side of South Park, where they wouldn't let me live. I'm sorry, I didn't want to tell you about that. No, to this day, they still won't let me live on that side of South Park. But they would let me go to school. We all could go to school for. My point is that the school for became a nexus that brought all of those various parts of the community together, where a certain normalization of everybody toward everybody else occurred, where everybody felt like they were a part of the same basic thing. Even though there were the nuances of individual cohorts within the community, there was still a general sense of community built around the school. But when you took the schools out of the neighborhood, so the school's physically in the neighborhood, but the neighborhood is not in the school. What do I mean by that? Well, when you decided that the most important thing for you to feel good about yourself was to have your kids go to school with kids from the South Side and the North Side and the West Side and some other side, kids had to go into integrated schools. You forced your kids to go to schools. Not just integrated in the sense that you could go to the school if you live within that school district, but I'm talking about forced. We're 70, 80% of the kids in the school at School 53 were deported to schools all over the city. 70% of the schools, the kids going to South Park were deported to schools all over, the city and so on. And as a consequence of that, the schools stopped being a part of the neighborhood. They were just physically in the neighborhood. Now, if you don't feel what I'm saying, go over on Oppenheimer Street or Northland, where there are still some businesses, old manufacturing businesses that are still there, right? They're still physically in the community. Literally 100% of the people that live in and around those plants, those manufacturing operations, within 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 or 9 or 15 blocks, literally 100% of those people are African people. And unless they're a maintenance man, you can't find an African person in those buildings to save your life. So they're clearly not a part of the community. But when you go to Schenectady, When you go to places in Alden and so on, you got businesses down there. Guess what? Guess who works in those businesses? The people that live in Alden, the people that live in Schenectady. The gum, manufacturing place, Beech Nut, in Schenectady is dominated by people who live in Schenectady who are the workforce for that gum manufacturing facility. So that those facilities are a part of the neighborhood that those facilities are in. But in Buffalo, you find that there are no businesses that are really a part of there are few businesses that are a part, and certainly not any big businesses that are a part of the communities that they are physically sitting in. These businesses are not drawing their workforce from the neighboring community. They're like an outpost, in somebody else's community. That's what schools have become, because they decided to turn these schools into some sort of racially balanced model where every school has, a certain range of this population, and so on. And in order to accomplish that, they basically deported kids from their neighborhoods into schools all over the city. The net result is the schools no longer are socializing agents in the communities that the schools are in. That was a strategic mistake from my point of view. There was obviously a value that somebody thought was to be achieved in the forced integration of these schools. Somebody thought, Coleman Report, whoever, they all thought that if you integrated the schools, even if you forcibly integrated the schools, if you just pick kids up and put them into schools that were not in their neighborhoods, that the value of black and brown and red and yellow children being around each other and becoming normal to each other, that value was so significant that it trumped, if you will, other values. Of course, I had a different value. Right?
So if it wasn't forced, do you think it would have ever happened? I mean, it would have naturally integrated schools.
What would happen is if you had fought the battle to integrate neighborhoods, in other words, to make sure that people were not cheating people out of opportunities to live in places that they could afford to live in, but were being denied the ability to live in because the people who own those properties refused to allow you to rent or buy in those neighborhoods. Over time, as African people began to get some of the jobs, hard as it was to get a job at Chevy and Bethlehem Steel and Ford and, Houdaille Industries and J.H. Williams and the Buffalo Forge, Republic Steel, and so on. As people started getting more of those jobs, they got more income. As they got more income, they were able to move economically out of the neighborhoods that they were in and be able to move into neighborhoods that were newer neighborhoods. Because that at the time, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, African people were living in the oldest parts of the city of Buffalo, and hardly any lived outside of the city of Buffalo because people wouldn't let you. I know it's hard for people to understand this now, but they just would not let you. They would come to you and tell you you can't live here. They would go to whoever was renting to you and tell the landlord, you can't rent to that person. If we have to pay you money or hurt you one way or the other, you cannot rent, to those non-white people and so on. So that's the way things would be. So if you fought that battle and won the battle against racial discrimination in housing, then you would see people starting to move around in all the different neighborhoods. And so you would wind up, as long as the schools didn't discriminate against you being able to go to the school in your neighborhood, you'd be fine. So if you had a house on St. Mary Street and there's a school on St. Mary's and Seneca Street, you'd go to that school, period, right? That was not the case in 1960. Just so you know, you could have a house on St. Mary Street and have a child, right? And your child couldn't go to the school right at the end of the block, because of discrimination and so on. So chasing that goal of school integration turned into destroying the idea of neighborhood schools. But I contend that the value, the benefits of neighborhood schools outweighs the benefits of forced integration of schools. That's the position that I'm taking. If we took from 1965 to today to get to a point where all of the neighborhoods in Buffalo were completely desegregated, you would have virtually the same, if not more, school integration than you got as a result of the forced integration process that was established in Buffalo. The problem for me is that what schools are supposed to be able to do for communities, they no longer did, because the community was not really a part of the school, right? So schools filled a vacuum that was not provided by home or church. We got to take our first break. Thank you, my brother. He just told me he just got back. We're going to take a quick break. Thank you, folks. We'll take a quick break. We'll see you on the side of the break here at Living Now, Living Right Now.
Do you want to increase your home's value? Do you want to lower your energy bills? Are you in need of affordable financing for your next home improvement project? The CAO Home Improvement Resource Program can help. Just come to their monthly HIRP orientation session every second Wednesday of the month at 564 Dodge Street, Building 400. HIRP staff will help identify the resources you need to get financed, and they'll even help you with completing your application. You won't know what you qualify for until you call them today at 881-6543. That's 881-6543. Learn about all the home improvement programs you may be eligible for and ask about the affordable financing program that can help turn your house into your dream home. Call 881-6543 for more info. It's the Home Improvement Resource Program, restoring value to neighborhoods across Erie County, one house at a time. Brought to you by the Community Action Organization of Erie County.
All right, welcome back to Living Now here at WFO Power 96.5 FM on your dial. This is L. Nathan Hare, your host. We're here with Emmanuel Radford, who's doing the live streaming of the program. And we're just talking about why this whole school integration thing came about. Who decided that that was the big to-do, that we needed to do that, right? You have to understand now, in for the entire history of the country up through the Civil Rights Act of 1965, it was literally statutorily legal for people to discriminate against you in housing, in voting, in schooling, in your health care, and so on. And so the idea of integration was something that was people perceived that to be a value in and of itself, that if you could achieve integration, you would achieve equal access to opportunity. But as with most things, when somebody's trying their absolute best not to do something, they find ways to manipulate those rulings and still hurt you. They can take what you thought was good for you and use that to harm you. We have a caller hanging on. Let me get that caller real quick. Hi, caller, are you there?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Hare.
Hi, Mother Dora, how you doing?
Well, I'm doing pretty good this morning. Usually on Monday, I'm kind of have a little slower way of doing things, but I wanted to thank you and the CAO for the beautiful banner and honor on Fillmore Avenue.
Yeah,
for those
much
people
deserved.
who might not know, if you ride down Fillmore and you go into the park from Best Street, you will encounter, I think it's about 15
15
living legend banners,
Yep.
and they are really beautiful. I took a lot of pictures, Mr. Hare. My son took a lot of pictures, and they're all on Facebook. But you will see approximately 15 banners, living legends in the city of Buffalo, including Mr. Nate Hare, Byron Brown, our first black mayor, Al Nisa from the Challenger, Sister Carrie L. Horn, and yours truly, with others as well. I don't want to take up a lot of time, but you can go down, ride down, take your young people to go down and see these banners on Fillmore, right near the Martin Luther King Park. It will be an education for them. And so I encourage people to do that, and I just want to thank you. But I'm not resting on my laurels, Mr. Hare.
I know you never do.
No, I never do. I just I have a couple questions for you on your topic, but I wanted to remind people that the essay contest I'm sponsoring now for adults on education, the deadline is October 27th by midnight. There's plenty of flyers at the Meriwether Library with all of the rules. But one of the questions on there, it's the very last question, and I'm asking people, if you had the power to name one of our schools in Buffalo after an African American, who would you choose and why? But I also caution people in answering that question to realize there are several schools already in the city named after African Americans, so you have to do some research. Matter of fact, I was talking to someone, and this person did not know that. And I said, well, if you answer that question, you cannot repeat those names
that are already there.
You have to find out who they are and then choose somebody different. So I try to always include some kind of different question to make people think. But what I wanted to ask you about the integration of the schools. Do you think that now our schools are being resegregated?
Yes.
And also the second question, for the next couple of days, beginning today, there is a public auction being held at the Buffalo Convention Center. And over 1,000 of the properties that are being sold are on the east side of Buffalo. On Bissell Avenue alone, there are 20 properties being sold.
Yep.
And in the Fruit Belt, which is a prime area, there are a number of properties being sold. With that being said, many African Americans are going to lose their homes. They've been trying to do something to help reduce that possibility, and they have worked with a lot of people. But we still have about 1,500 properties that are going to be sold. So a lot of people are going to be forced out. They're going to be forced out of their community. And I think this will contribute to almost forced resegregation. Then people will have to go out into the outlying areas. Their children will have to go to other schools. So I think this also has an impact. But I wanted to see what you thought about that. And thank you again, Mr. Hare, and I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
All right. Thank you, Mother Doyle, and congratulations. Great job. And she's absolutely right. We have people who are losing their homes because they didn't pay the garbage user fee. Sometimes that could be $300 or $400. You can have your whole, and then the idea of the law is that they would sell your home to get the resources to pay off whatever the debt was, and give you the money. But if the debt was, say, $300,000 or $400,000 or $600,000, and you could sell the house normally for $20,000, that's not what they end up selling the house for. You're likely to get the house to be sold for $3,000 or $4,000, and then most of the money beyond the debt, the tax debt or whatever it was, would wind up going to the lawyer's fees for the people that actually administered the sale of the house, and the person who owned the house winds up, with virtually nothing. And what does that mean? It means you wind up now becoming a renter, and when you become a renter, you probably know that there are almost no above standard grade housing that's available in Buffalo right now. And if there was, you'd be paying $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 a month, for a rent for those properties, not including your utilities. So we have a real problem that we have to figure out a way as a community to solve. I think we need to bring together our church organizations and others and start thinking about, are there ways that we can begin to land bank by buying these properties up, putting them into a church trust, and then figuring out ways to help people to become homeowners and get the resources they need to fix these properties up. We have another caller. Hang on, we got that call real quick. Hi, caller, are you there?
Yes, I believe so. I've been listening to your program and, have a clear understanding of what happened to me back in the 60s when I had to leave my school that was in the neighborhood. But my question, Dr. Hare, it has to do with an alternative plan to what's going on now. From what I get from you listening to you as much as I can, that you are opposed to the system that we're in now, and hopefully would, join or be a part of a change that might take us back to those neighborhood schools. But so now I'm saying, okay, it's been decided by the powers that be, and the community rallying. So now we're going to go back to the idea of neighborhood schools. Economically, from a financial standpoint, I'm looking at just the bus drivers who no doubt would lose their jobs, and that kind of trickle-down effect as a result of a change that's going to benefit our children, and there's no price we can put on that. But I was just wondering if you had thought about the ramifications, what happens, if that change does take place. So
Right.
I hope you can get to it. I'm going to listen to you and appreciate your program.
Thank you, brother. And that is one of the issues that we always find ourselves, confronted with. There may be 40 or 50 bus drivers. So we're being put in a position where we're saying, should we reform the schools in a way that makes the schools more rational and articulate to the needs of the communities that the schools are in? Or should we ensure that the 40 or 50 bus drivers still be able to work as bus drivers? Now, that's an ugly paradox, right? But it is a paradox. So my view is we should have a game plan for the bus drivers. How can we integrate the bus drivers into other functions within the school district that allows them to continue to work and still go back to neighborhood schools? So there's always going to be a need for some of the bus drivers. For example, if schools, if a child goes to a school that's walking distance for the child, you're probably not talking more than 8 blocks from the physical school that the child has to be to walk to school. When you get beyond 8 blocks, you're probably going to want to drive that child to that school anyway. When we were younger, of course, we were a little bit more robust, so you had to be 15 blocks from the school before they would give you bus transportation. But I'm saying that you can have smaller jitney type buses that those bus drivers could be employed in to get those kids who are a little bit further away from what would be their neighborhood school. Keep in mind that we had 31 schools in Buffalo that no longer exist because in order to make integration work, they forced kids to go to other neighborhoods by simply closing the schools that were in their neighborhoods. So that meant you had no neighborhood school to go to. I'm a believer that we should reopen many of those neighborhood schools. I think that we have too many people in these schools. These schools with 600, 800, 1,000 kids going to the school and one principal, I don't think that makes sense. I think you should have a principal for every population of around 300 kids or so that the principal and the kids and their families actually know each other. But getting to our caller's point, I think that you could save probably half, if not more, of those drivers, if you use them to do the within boundary driving that needs to be done to get those kids that are a little bit further away from the school to get them to the school back and forth in the morning and the afternoon. Also, you've got kids who need to be transported to go to activities after school that may not be at their individual schools. So I think there'd still be some work. We just need to organize that. And if there ends up being 15 or 20 people that don't get picked up through that process, let's find another alternative. But let's not say that we're not going to save 33,000 kids because we're trying to figure out what to do with 20, bus drivers. Let's not make that the issue. Let's think this thing out. Do we have a caller? Hang on. Okay, we're going to grab that call real quick. Hi, caller. Are you there?
Good morning, Nathan.
Hello, Bob. How you doing?
Very good. A couple of quick thoughts. You could always use some of the school bus drivers as teacher rates. Since they're already being paid, the money's already allocated.
Right.
They could help out in the education of the children if need be, and could double, as you say, bus drivers for other activities or driving to science museums, art galleries, concerts.
Right. I think we just have to be creative and innovative and have the goal in mind that every one of those 40 or 50 bus drivers is going to end up having a job when we get done with this process. That becomes your goal. We not only do we have PhDs working for us, we paid for the PhDs. We paid for their education. We paid for their graduate degree. We paid for their PhDs. We paid for, the entire support, for these folks. I think it's okay for us to demand of the people that we pay to do this work that they figure it out. Don't keep coming back to us as the citizens and saying there's a problem. You all figure it out. We're putting $1 billion in your hands, $1 billion. I expect you to be able to figure this out, not to bring that problem to me. I'm sorry.
Maybe the goal is to keep the system broke so that the kids aren't getting a proper education. And I'm just going to leave you with a question to ponder. When I went to school and when you went to school, we used to get out for Christmas vacation and Easter vacation. As you know, that has been eliminated from the school system. You can't even have a conversation about creation versus evolution because they just don't allow any type of conversation with God. So if Dr. Martin Luther King actually had the title Reverend, would they allow that name to stay on the school, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, or would that be too controversial?
No, and his name is always Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King when he's on.
God bless you,
titles.
Nathan.
All right.
I'll talk to you later.
Thanks. Take care. Should we take our last break and then let's do that so we don't get too far away from our requirements. Take care of our sponsors. Look forward to talking to you on the other side of the break here at Living Now, Living Right Now.
Do you want to increase your home's value? Do you want to lower your energy bills? Are you in need of affordable financing for your next home improvement project? The CAO Home Improvement Resource Program can help. Just come to their monthly HIRP orientation session every second Wednesday of the month at 564 Dodge Street, Building 400. HIRP staff will help identify the resources you need to get financed, and they'll even help you with completing your application. You won't know what you qualify for until you call them today at 881-6543. That's 881-6543. Learn about all the home improvement programs you may be eligible for and ask about the affordable financing program that can help turn your house into your dream home. Call 881-6543 for more info. It's the Home Improvement Resource Program, restoring value to neighborhoods across Erie County, one house at a time. Brought to you by the Community Action Organization of Erie County.
All right. Welcome back to Living Now here at WFO Power 96.5 FM on your dial. This is L. Nathan Hare, your host, here with Emmanuel Radford, who's doing the live streaming of the program. And just so we put a fine point, on this issue, my point, I guess, that I'm trying to get us to understand is if at the end of the day, regardless that Nate here may be a black nationalist and you might not like me being a black nationalist, okay, so fine, we can deal with that. But we're not talking about my politics. We're not talking about, some narrow point of view that you may feel that I or others may have. What we're talking about is what is the goal of the public school education, period? What is the goal? And I'm suggesting to you, by going back to the people who invented the public school system in the United States, they said what the goal was. I'm just repeating to you what Horace Mann and those people said was the goal. Their goal was to create a basic level of academic literacy that virtually every human being in the society shared, and a basic level of moral values that were shared by everybody in the society, that was the underpinning of having a common sense of citizenship that allowed us to be able to walk forward in the society together and not being at each other's throats. This is not rocket science. That's absolutely what the purpose of education is. So with that goal in mind, I'm willing to even allow you to sell me on the idea that forced integration of these schools was something that made some sense. I don't think it made sense, but if you think it made sense, I'm not arguing with you about that. I'm simply saying that what you thought was going to occur is not what occurred. You thought that if you desegregated all of the schools, that everybody would get used to being around everybody else. We'd all wind up being kumbaya together. We wouldn't think of ourselves as black, brown, white, yellow, green, orange, and all that other kind of stuff. We would think of ourselves as just being human and so on, right? And that as a consequence, we'd have shared human objectives, human goals for our human society. That's what you thought was going to occur. Very noble thought. Noble thought. I'm down with that. Now, we've been at this 50 years. Did that happen? No. So when I said to your father all the time, okay, if you leave Buffalo and you're trying to get to Rochester, which you know is east of Buffalo, you get in your car and you drive, and after an hour, you look at a sign in front of you and it says Cleveland, 120 miles ahead. What's the very first thing you're going to do? You're going to stop. Even if you don't know how to get to Rochester, you know that the way you're going is not going to get you there, right? So the first thing you're going to do is stop so that you don't keep going further away from your objective. Then sit down and reassess, come up with a game plan on how you can get back east that will head you towards Rochester. Just common sense, right? So I'm saying to you that whatever you thought was going to occur with this forced integration model, it did not occur. In fact, schools in Buffalo and schools in urban communities all across the United States are more segregated now than they have been at any time in the history of the United States. So clearly, you are going in the wrong direction. So I'm saying the first thing you have to do is stop going in the wrong direction. Just stop doing that. Then let's sit down and figure out what's the real direction that we want to go. To get to the real direction, you have to go back to what your real objective was. Your real objective was to create a base level of targeted academic literacy. When I say targeted, that means that when you finish the fourth grade, you can read and write at a fourth grade level. When you finish the eighth grade, you can count at the eighth grade level. When you finish the 12th grade, you can read, count, reason scientifically, research, self-study, and so on at a 12th grade level. That's what you're trying to get done. In addition to that, you want your schools to be the socializing agency in your community because it's the only agency in your community that virtually everybody touches. So why use something to create a outcome among everybody that only 10% of the people ever touch? Obviously, that's not going to create an outcome for the other 90% of the people. But all of us go to school. And if you're not going to school, you should be in jail. I mean, all of us, you should be going to detention or someplace, right? All of us should be going to school. So if all of us go to school, we can use the school as a vehicle to ensure that we have decent starts in our lives in terms of our health care, understanding of nutrition, our basic academic reasoning ability, our ability to work with each other, to have a shared understanding of what American citizenship is. That's got to get done in school. It's the only broad-based vehicle that we have that touches everybody, and it does it every day. You go to school 5 days a week for 39 weeks out of the school year. And many of you, because you didn't do so well during the school year, go to school during the summer as well. Okay. So this is the way to get this done. So if that's our goal, then let's reorganize what we're doing.